This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. This is a very special edition. Today we've got Chris Helsel. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer from Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, the great and iconic brand. Welcome to the Impact Podcast, Chris.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Chris, thank you for your time. I know you're super busy and you're sitting today in Ohio. I'm sitting in Fresno, California, as we hopefully make our way through this tragic period in world history, this global pandemic. And before we get talking about Goodyear Tire and all the important work you're doing there with your colleagues, I'd love you to share with our listeners your backstory. How did you even get here?
Sure. No, thank you. So I feel like I've never left Ohio, but yet I have. So I actually grew up outside Cleveland, Ohio, on the east side, the suburb of Wickliffe. Went through high school, and then I went to Cleveland State, got an undergrad in mechanical engineering, and I had the opportunity at that time to work for Standard Oil of Ohio, who's now BP. Wow. And so once again, have Ohio in the name even. And I got introduced to some computer modeling techniques where you could actually design things without having to build and test. Wow. And then from there, I progressed into different industries. The nuclear Navy work at Babcock and Wilcox in Barberton, Ohio. I worked for the Goodyear Aerospace at one time, doing some work on wheels and brakes, again, using that technique. And ultimately, I found my way to Goodyear in 1996 when we were bringing those kind of people on to do tires. And so my career here started doing simulation of racing tires, and then just continued through technology and product development. Had an opportunity to live overseas, run a business, and then one day found myself as CTO, and which I've had for a bit over 3 years.
That's really cool. So I have to ask you this first, because we've all grown up with the Goodyear brand. And for one reason or another, because of our love of cars or whatever, it's such an iconic and amazing American brand. And so, have you ever been on the Goodyear blimp?
So it's funny you should say that, is I have my 25-year anniversary this June at Goodyear, and I have saved that opportunity for that, and I'm getting it lined up through my communications guy, and it's going to be how I celebrate my 25th year.
That is just a wonderful way to celebrate. There's not a time that I drive up and down the 405 freeway when I'm in Los Angeles and I pass by somewhere, I think in the Torrance area, and I'm headed north and I look over to my right side and I see the Goodyear blimp parked there. I'm like, that would just be, talk about one of the items on a bucket list. That would be just so much fun to go up in that. So good for you. You're going to get to do it this year.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things. We actually brought it to CES in 2020, January 2020. It was part of our event. We had a nice event there where we rolled out some of the work we're doing in our, what we'll come to talk about in our Beyond Tire space. And part of it was you could get a blimp ride. So,
wow.
So it could be arranged.
Talk about a showstopper. That's a way to bring people on board with what you're doing over at CES, because that's such a big crowd and you have some of the greatest brands on the planet there to set yourself apart. I can't think of a better way. That sounds like fun. Hey, for our listeners and our colleagues out there, we've got Chris Helsel with us today. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Goodyear. And to find Chris and his colleagues and all the great work they're doing, you can go to www.goodyear.com, goodyear.com. I'm on your website right now. I love your website. It's colorful. It's informational. It has a lot of great information about what we're about to talk about today. So talk a little bit about tires. They seem like, for a layman like me, They don't look like they changed that much over the years, but talk a little bit about, since you're the chief technology officer, tell us how they're really changing and changing for the better.
Right. So I'll break it down really in two areas. One, I'll just call tires, right? Which you say, well, that's obvious, but that really is the physical tire as you know it today. And for that, what you really need to understand is how many different materials go into a tire. A lot of people think what it is an injection molded, you pour in this black stuff and out comes a hardened tire. But actually there's a lot of materials that go into a tire. So if you think of the multiples of polymers and the fillers, the reinforcements, they could be steel, they could be nylon, polyester. So tires have more than 50, sometimes up to 100 different components actually in them that come together to form a tire as you know it. And the important part about a tire to always remember is it's the only thing that connects your vehicle with the road. And it does that through 4 palm-sized patches, basically. That carries all the load that has to happen to make your vehicle traverse on your trip in a safe way. So in that area, there's all kinds of innovation on materials. Some of them are like sustainable materials. We use soybean oil instead of petroleum has been one of the innovations, and one that we use both not only because of sustainability play, but it really gives you better performance, in particular in traction. Traction being so important for your stopping distance, your cornering capabilities. So sustainable materials are a really exciting area. And the second area is really how do you design the tire? Yeah. And for that, we're doing an awful lot building on what I first came to Goodyear to do, which was computer modeling. We've actually invested in full-scale simulators. If you could imagine cutting the hood off of a vehicle and the trunk off of the vehicle, and you put it on these huge actuators, surround it with a 270-degree screen that's almost 2.5 stories high, and a total immersion as though you're driving on the road. And we've invested in that in Akron, and we're now bringing that online on how we design tires without having to actually build and test. And we've committed to our second one in our sister innovation center in Luxembourg. So those would be 2 areas in traditional tires to really highlight technology that's coming that wouldn't have been the technology we would have had, let's just say, a short time ago.
So excuse my ignorance. Goodyear, I know to be such a big brand. Obviously, the brand is over 100 years old now. Where does it fall in terms of size, in terms of other tire brands on the planet?
So if you think of, a lot of people think of Goodyear, they do think of other big brands, right? You've got your Michelins, your Bridgestones, and clearly we all compete, and we compete in these big areas. We are the biggest in the Americas, right, in North America, right, and then compete in that top 3 around the world. So we are a very big player, obviously, in tires, and we're really excited about what we've announced, which is our combination with Cooper Tire, which is only going to increase our scale all the more. So what an exciting position for you to be in, though, because it seems like in a world that we all get to, even today, you and I are talking over the Zoom call when there's been less and less travel because of the pandemic that we've all faced. So everyone leverages technology. So to be the chief technology officer at a company that's a legacy company and leverage technology to take it to its new future. Talk a little bit about that. How many teams of people do you have under you, and how open is a legacy brand to change and evolving while you still want to maintain, of course, the great things that made you the great brand that got you to where you are today? Sure. So maybe to give a sense of the scale of my team, right? And we'll talk first on the technology side. We go to market regionally. So I have a product development leader for each of those regions, and we have 3 regions. Then to feed those folks, those areas that I just described, the new materials and things, prior to their even starting their product development, I have a leader who's developing technology ahead of time. Okay. Then the whole side that I haven't even mentioned yet is what we call our beyond tires. And in that space, we have a couple of leaders who are doing 2 things. One, in market, they're learning what are some of the new needs for future mobility. And when you think of future mobility, it's hey, consumer vehicles, your individual car ownership, and some of these trends have been slowed a little bit. Some are accelerating, but they're still very much here with COVID. Fleets of vehicles instead of individual car ownership, autonomous driving, connected vehicles where they can actually transmit information and data, and then electric vehicles in terms of replacing internal combustion engines. And in that space, when you think about an exciting area, as much as our traditional tire area for innovation is exciting, we're really doing some cool things over there. And maybe two of them that I could talk about would be, first, our AndGo digital platform, wherein you basically, we call it the vehicle readiness platform. You can put your connected vehicle on there, and we can schedule. Today, we can service out of our own footprint over 60% of all your service needs. And then we can connect others in order to serve the rest of those needs. And we've been growing that platform significantly. We've got some announcements out there of some of our great customers who are trying that service, people like Toro, et cetera, who are shaping this new mobility. And the other area is tire intelligence. And that's basically, how do you put a sensor in a tire, collect real-time information, and use that in order to drive both better maintenance for tires, but also how do we take that to drive even better vehicle performance?
Is that sensor already in use or not yet commercialized?
So we've got it out in pilot. We've done millions of miles on these sensors. Actually, where you find sensors quite a bit is in the commercial truck arena. They're not necessarily tire mounted, but they are there to monitor temperature, pressure. And from that information, we can actually predict and prevent downtime incidents by noticing the trends that are coming in those data as they're put through some of our proprietary algorithms. The cool thing is, it's great to give people a signal, but what we can then do is connect you into our footprint of service locations where we have thousands of them, right, in region. Wow. In fact, in the US, anywhere you have a service need for a tire, we could have you up and running in under 2 hours, anywhere in the entire US. So it's kind of taking that model into this emerging consumer mobility area, enabled by a digital platform to do it, as well as sensors on the tires themselves.
So it's really more of an ecosystem opportunity where you not only sell the tires to the new consumer, but then you also get to talk to them during their use of them. And if they need repair, get to also take care of that need. So you're keeping them in the Goodyear ecosystem.
That's exactly right. Because one of the number one ways in which everybody listening here can get the most out of your tires, including the best performance, is simply keeping the right amount of air in them. And that, believe it or not, happens very infrequently. Most tires are running around without the exact proper inflation. So just that job in and of itself makes tires last longer, perform better, and safer.
And those last two initiatives that you mentioned, they're coming out of your innovation labs. Is that where they're coming out?
That's correct. Yeah, the way to think about that is they both come out of some of our traditional innovation centers, because we do have to connect into data of the tire characteristics themselves to do things like the wear prediction.
Right.
But we're doing an awful lot in like San Francisco. So an example there was we started only a few years back with a couple of people. Go learn about the ecosystem where all the innovation's happening. Who are the people who are, putting together these shared fleet type concepts? And what we did was start making those connections, and we started identifying what are potential jobs we can uniquely do. And this idea of vehicle readiness is a big one, because tires are one of the number one reasons that a fleet can't, do its job seamlessly. So being able to help them anticipate those issues or respond quickly when they happen, it really helps their efficiency, which of course is their cost. That's a big deal for fleets.
And I read in some of the information on Goodyear when I was preparing for today's interview that, of course, when Goodyear started back in the 1890s, there was no such thing as we know it today as Silicon Valley. But you actually now, as part of your technology initiative, you actually have an office in Silicon Valley. Is that true?
That's correct. We've grown that office more than tenfold. And so we actually have in market there, the people who are then collaborating, as well as that's where we do a lot of the programming on our digital platform, because you get access to some of the best talent around, with respect to doing that type of work, right? So being immersed in that, being immersed in that ecosystem, it gives you access to the customers and access to the talent. And we've been blessed to get some good ones on both sides.
So when kids are coming out of Stanford, like just say great engineers, you're actually in competition against Google, Facebook. Now you're in the hunt because you're over in Silicon Valley.
There you go. It's one of the ways in which, even though we're 100 years old, you might think of us as, hey, we're one of those original startups and we're starting up again.
I love it. That's exciting. Chris, what are the big movements right now? When we turn on CNBC and Bloomberg and any of the other business channels, Wall Street Journal or New York Times Business, is this ecosystem of ESG investment, or for lack of better terms, also known as a circular economy, the shift from the linear economy to the circular economy. Can you share some wisdom as to how what you're doing at Goodyear informs us that tires are no longer going to be just part of the linear economy, that what you're doing in terms of your innovations are also preparing the Goodyear tires to be part of the circular economy in the future?
Sure. So I would say, I'll start with, what it is tires are made out of.
Sure.
Right. And I mentioned, our work on soybean. We've also done work on some of the fillers. Silica is one of the strong fillers that's used to bond to the rubber or the polymer. That's what gives it its stiffness and its resilience, et cetera. And so for there, we use what's called rice husk silica ash. And basically what it is the husk of rice, so the discarded waste is then turned into an ash, which can be made into the silica. And then that silica can be reclaimed, and we use it, of course, in tires. So there's things we're doing to use and connect into other industries' waste products in order to turn them in ours. Even our soybean isn't competing with the bean for food. It's actually a part of the byproduct from the process of processing soybean. So we're being very cognizant of where does those sources come from. So there's one area. The other area is how can we recover tires at end of life? Now, a lot of people don't know, but the majority, it's over 90% of tires are reclaimed at end of life and repurposed. However, what we'd love to be able to do is repurpose them back to at least equal. Right. So if we could find ways, and there are some startups that we're partnering with and working with to break those end of life tires back to their fundamental building blocks, the oils, the resins, the fillers, the polymers, and then repurpose them back into the next generation tires, will really make that progress on that circular economy. Right. Because the majority of as we think about sustainability comes from our product. We make lots of those products, right? And so the more we can do that, the better. One thing, though, that people may not realize that even happens day in, day out today is on the commercial tire side, how much of a tire is reused multiple times in its life through retreading. So retreading is a huge part of our business model when it comes to commercial trucks. That tire is sold new once, and then it can be reused 2 more times by taking the old tread off and only replacing the tread. So those tires, although maybe in first life only may go a couple 100,000 miles, you could actually do that a couple, 2, 3 more times through life, sometimes almost nearing 1 million miles on 8 parts of that tire. So that's another way in which we do participate even today in circular economy.
How I never even knew of that. How often does that happen out of the percentage of 18-wheelers or trucks that we see on the road today? Is that happening to 10% of the tires that are being used today? 20%? What are the best guess that you could give without having to be perfectly exact, of course?
So you happen to be talking to somebody who ran our retread business. So
there you go.
So when it comes to North America, the 2 front tires to steer are always new. Okay. It's the tires that then those steer tires will last about 150,000 miles. You then take those, you buff off the old, you put a new tread on, you put them in the drive, they'll go about 250,000 or so miles. Wow. Then you go buff those off and put them in the trail, and they could last, let's say another 150,000, although trailers don't run day in, day out. There's more trailers than there are tractors. Okay. And so Actually, the majority of tires on trailers are retread.
Okay.
At least half, I would say, of your drive tires are retread. So more than half the tires in the drive position in the trailer. So on an 18-wheeler, 16 of the tires, 50%, I would say, is my good estimate of that are retreaded at any given time.
So really, from a commercial perspective, you guys are already in a big part of the circular economy from that perspective. From a commercial down to just a man on the street or a woman on the street like you or me, are regular cars not able to leverage that same retreading technology? Is that not part of what happens today?
Yeah, one of the big enablers to that, to make it happen, with our great customers like a JB Hunt, Schneider, or a Ryder, is the fact that in the United States, 80% of truck tires are only two different sizes. And so therefore, you're able to keep using those on truck unit to truck unit. If you think of the proliferation of new trim levels and things on cars, you don't have that consistency, correct? The second thing is the carcass of the tire. So not to get too techie geeked out on the tire technology, is steel, and it is designed for that in a truck tire. Now, in car tires, you do have a steel belt, but you have fabric plies because they are more designed for single life use. So about the only passenger type tires that you see that are significantly retreaded is everything you see on the post office. Those post office vehicles, because they're under a controlled environment by and large, they don't go overly high speed. They do use significant retreading as well.
No kidding. So going back to the issues of sourcing materials, like you mentioned, of soybeans, and then also working with different joint venture opportunities on people who could take a tire and recycle the material efficiently and get it back into your ecosystem. Given those balancing act of those two things, alternative materials and then also recycling materials in a circular economy sense, how much of a Goodyear tire today compared to 90 years ago, 80 years ago, 70 years ago are made out of either sustainable materials or recycled materials? If you were to say, what percentage today are?
Yeah, sure. Today, if you look at like our weather ready type of product, it's about a third.
A third
is made out of sustainable type materials. That's correct. And we're very much on track. We've laid out, for ourselves, a challenge of a bold goal is to demonstrate we could make 100% one by the end of the decade. Now, that's not saying we're going to sell all of our tires being 100%, but to show it's possible. And the reason I say that is you got to understand, in order to really make it mainstream to where we could have 100% sustainable recycled tires, just think of the huge supply chains that we have to set up, total new partnerships. A startup has to get to the point where they're providing, the millions and millions and millions of pounds of materials and things that go into tire, right? So you just got to figure somebody like us even, we make, let's say, approximately 150 million tires, average weight of about 20 pounds a piece. We in and of ourselves consume, 3 billion pounds of materials, right? So just to get the supply chain set up, and that's just us, let alone the whole industry, it's going to take a while, but it's going to start by showing it's possible. And we want to be the first ones to say it's possible. And that's why we laid out that moonshot goal of a 2030 demonstrate it.
I love it. For our listeners and viewers who've just joined us, we're honored to have Chris Helsel with us today. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Goodyear. To find all the good things they're doing at Goodyear and Chris and his colleagues, go to www.goodyear.com. Chris, talk a little bit about the differential when you're thinking of technology, the race car business, which we all grew up with, which we all still love in America and around the world, versus dealing with the new ventures that have gotten so much of our mind space now, like a Tesla or any of those other great new brands that have come out to help our environment improve. How does that work from the seat that you sit in?
Sure. I would say this, I'm going to go back to I've introduced this idea of tires, which is our classical innovation, and then this beyond tires. And it's really required. We almost have this dual innovation set of tools. One is, very much when you think of a tire, it is a safety product. And we run that, and it's got to be at scale that we can do things in a very traditional kind of stage gate process, right? Where we start out, here's the attributes of the product, and you've got to get alignment of all your investments so that out the end you can make at very large scales these products that time and time again are going to be and perform in the safe way, right? Again, I go back to it's the only thing connecting you to Earth that I think is really important to think about. When we get into, though, the area of, like I described, this ANGO or the intelligent tire, it's really if you've ever heard of the lean startup, where it's a, hey, we got to get to a real minimum viable product. So let's get there so we can quickly test it. And then maybe we put it out in a beta version and then we update it. And so it's a very different mindset. It's very inquisitive, experimental, because you just don't know what you don't know. So we basically have to have both of those capabilities in order to work in innovation today. Because on one side, to do like IoT, Internet of Things type of innovation, it's learn fast. It could be we create something, we try it, and somebody says, that's interesting, but it really doesn't solve my problem.
Right.
Where on the tire side, we have pretty good predictability of what it is that we need because, we have good insights into the market because the market's pretty mature. So we need both of those sets of skills.
Got it. Hey, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're still on the other side of working our way through. Science is winning on this pandemic. What were some of your greatest lessons learned on how you navigated Goodyear through the pandemic, and what lessons learned are you going to take forward, and how has that affected your supply chain?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that many of us learned, and I could give this example, we were sitting in a senior leadership meeting talking about how we were going to test out whether Microsoft Teams was going to work, for some small percentage of our people to prove to ourselves we could start working remote. And then I remember by the end of the meeting, we were getting phone calls saying different countries in Europe are being shut down, et cetera. And we by the end of the meeting said, we're just going for it.
Right.
And lo and behold, it really did perform. I mean, we've given a lot of accolades to our IT group, and probably other people have too, that this stuff was much more ready for prime time than we gave it credit. And so I'd say one of the number one things we walked out and learned is sometimes we should just go for it. Right. We think if we hadn't just gone for it, we'd probably still be arguing if the pilot was successful today. I mean, I'm joking, but I think that's a real leadership lesson learned, right? And I think that's one of the things we want to hold on to, that decisiveness, that agility. I think those are a couple things for everybody to hold on to.
People talk about supply chain disruptions and that we're all working our way out of it in different industries, some affected more than others. Did it affect your supply chain, or are you in good shape right now?
So interestingly, I know this might sound strange to some folks, but my title is Chief Technology Officer. The Senior Vice President is actually of Global Operations. So I actually have responsibility for the centralized group of procurement and quality, et cetera. And then doing that on the daily basis with our regional businesses, right? So we very much partner. It's a matrix responsibility. And I'll tell you, the challenges are out there. The challenges are real. But what we found is our team performed pretty darn well. They had gotten ahead of getting some of what they needed to do the shipping that they needed to do. They had previously booked some containers. We had some increased safety stocks and things. So knock on wood, so far we've had no lost production. Been able to keep our plants up and running, and good job by, I'd say, some of the operations team too, keeping our people safe while they've been up and running. So on both sides of the COVID threat and the supply threat, so far we've been able to keep the trains on time.
I love your moonshot goal. I love by the end of the decade, you're going to try to make tires out of recyclable material, fully out of recyclable material. You're at a third now, approximately sustainable and recycled material. Chris, 25 years you're there, but you seem to have the energy and the excitement of someone who's just into this thing 3 or 4 years. What gets you out of bed right now? What's in the future for Goodyear besides the moonshot goals that you share with our listeners?
I would say, we talked about the tire intelligence, and I guess I should say this. I'll start out because you got to be a little bit you and I started our conversation with the family. I love all my children the same. So I get up in the morning because I love my supply chain folks and I love my innovation folks. So you can't pick who's your favorite child, right?
I love it. I got you.
One of the exciting things I think is when we talked entire intelligence, where I didn't get the conversation with you so far is the job beyond monitoring is how the tire can become actually an active sensor. And I'll go back to that idea. The tire is the only thing touching the road.
Right.
And what's really important to know at any given time is that tire sticking or slipping? Because if it's slipping, you want braking action occurring, you want traction happening, et cetera, through those automated systems. So one of the areas we're also working is how can we have a smart tire talking to a smarter braking system? We've proven already that as a tire wears, it breaks, it takes a little longer, its characteristics change. We can recover almost a third of that by integrating just knowing the current state of the tire with braking. And now if you take that concept to know what's happening at that interface, how can we inform the future autonomous driver, right? That autonomous system is counting on what's happening at that interface. If we could inform that system of exactly what's going on, boy, we could help unlock new use cases for autonomous driving. Maybe instead of only being able to drive under ideal weather conditions like today, which is really a great engineering achievement, how about under wet conditions or snow conditions? Because you know better exactly what's happening at that interface. And then I'd even take it further. If we're the ones who know what's going on that interface, right? It's one thing to know it's cold outside, so maybe the roads need treatment, but it'd be another because our intelligent tire rolled over that road that only for this 100 feet does the road really need treatment. So let's go prioritize that. And we can inform maybe infrastructure maintainers or providers. So I think there's a lot of other cool things we could do because of two things we're working on. The fact that we're the only thing touching that road. And secondly, in the intelligence that we're trying to add to that. Now, those are moonshots too for us. But I think, that kind of really gets you going. Right, that we could really take safety to a new level.
So that's a 1-2 punch, what you're saying. Data collection from the tire touching the road and collecting all the data, and then the data analytics of then who it informs and how it informs them.
You got it.
Brilliant. Well, and now give me like if, again, moonshot, I love it that you've already put it under that umbrella. You said on the recycled tires, hopefully by the end of the decade, hopefully there's no guarantees. We know big, hairy goal. How about that? How many years do you think you're talking about that moonshot project?
You will see this year the intelligent tire released for doing the monitoring.
Wow.
And then what you will see, I would say before 2025, 2027-ish, the tire actually being a sensor. Because that friction work is still we've got some promising avenues to pursue on that.
Well, wonderful. Well, Chris, thank you for your time today. I really hope I get to meet you one day, and I want you to know that you're always welcome back on the Impact Podcast to share all the new innovations you're doing at Goodyear. For our listeners and viewers, to find Chris, his colleagues, and all the great work that Goodyear's doing, go to www.goodyear.com. Chris, you are making a huge impact and making the world a better place. And thank you for joining us today in the Impact Podcast.
Thank you.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by the Marketing Masters. The Marketing Masters is a boutique marketing agency offering website development and digital marketing services to small and medium businesses across America. For more information on how they can help you grow your business online, please visit themarketingmasters.com.